There we go. And I'm going to turn off some lights here just for contrast. Maybe that's enough. Yes. Okay, welcome back. And this is our last session of the course in environmental bioethics within the program of the Masters in Science of Bioethics at St. Thomas University. Always beginning with a little prayer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O Lord, send forth your Spirit, and we shall be recreated. You shall renew the face of the earth. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. All right. Before we get into the actual subject matter, this issue of evaluating the course, right? Just like you have done in the past. Here's a little email that I got. That's why I remember. Otherwise, I would have forgotten. But evaluations are just open yesterday, right? So you can go into that website and evaluate the course. You can do it on your phone. It's all online. So you've done it before, all of you, I believe, one way or another, either for this program or in your bachelor's. Anyone does not know how to evaluate the course? Anyone not know how to evaluate the course? Online folks, I think you all know how to do that already. You've done it before. So please do that. Right now, it's you can see 0% have evaluated it, but it just opened, right? And you have until the 27th. Don't wait until the 27th. Thanksgiving next week is in the way and all that. So please do it this weekend if at all possible. Okay? And because that's what the administration looks at, and the dean looks at those evaluations for assessment. And of course, I look at them too, to try to better the course in whatever way I can with your suggestions. All right. Any question or comment about course evaluation? Everybody knows how to do that? Yes, okay. Right, now, talk a little bit about this conference. First thing I want to say is that it's not over yet, even though it's posted officially. It's over yesterday for 2 weeks, and we had planned this. I had planned this lecture on purpose at the end of the conference, hypothetically, to see the final documents and all that. But last night I saw on the news that the delegates decided to extend it through today. So it's not over, and therefore there are no final documents. They're still going at it. That's one thing to note. Therefore, it's still a working issue. All right, any preliminary comments or questions or topic? Basically today, obviously I don't have a presentation as such, and typically, as you know from previous courses, the last lecture is more speculative like this, and there's no summary due or anything like that. And sometimes I have a presentation, sometimes not, but it's kind of the state of the art, the last lecture in every one of the courses, and therefore no summary. And this one in particular is just an open discussion basically among us, trying to apply a little bit everything that we've been covering in this course on environmental bioethics. So any preliminary comments that anyone wants to share?
Well, Father, I told you that I've been looking at it.
Tina. So,
and
you know what I'm going to do? Hold on. I'm just going to open this so that people can see the tiles, right? And if that way, if you are online, we can see you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I was navigating into this, which I found it very interesting, but there was two particular parts that caught my attention. In the topics, when I went to the topics, I found one that is called Education and Youth.
Yes, that's right up your alley.
Yes, and I opened it, and
yes.
It is interesting, but the tabs do not allow you to so they said that there's going to be education. I mean, I cannot touch it, right? I mean, education, public awareness,
Right.
training,
Okay.
but there's not really um, any way to get access to that. I would like to see how can I get access to that.
Yeah. Okay. Is it one of the top tabs
In
or?
the topics, go to topics.
Okay. I think
It's the third one, 1 to 4 one.
topics. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
And then
All
go
right.
to
Okay.
education and
Education and
youth.
youth. Yes, I see it here. Right. Okay. Let's see.
And then you open, go scroll down.
Let me minimize now. All right. What
You
is
see
A?
those,
Education, public awareness, etc.
but
All
there's
right.
no. Go up again, please.
Up, a little further
Right
up.
there.
Here.
Those, yes, there's no interaction there. How can I get access
Right.
to any of those things?
Right. Yes. Okay. So these don't have a link, right? These are not linked. We can see, at least for us as non-members, but the ones on the bottom are linked.
Yeah, and I look at it, but there's
Okay.
no really, like
Not
for
much
instance, the
substance.
the focal points, I look at that and I
Okay.
saw some of the delegation people and I thought that maybe I can contact the one in United States, but that might not be, it's kind of very far away from me.
Yeah. Okay. So this goes by country. I see here.
Yeah, and it's United States.
Probably the talks that they gave, or these are resources. United States is
Right
here.
there, right there. Down.
Okay,
There.
Department of State. Interesting. It's not the education department, first of all. That's one thing that caught my attention. So this is basically, okay, so this is just the website, the official website of the US Department of State. That's why he's talking about the war in Ukraine, right? It's just a link to you see, the US Department of State.
Right.
So my first impression about this is that this is just a protocol in the sense that the U.S. Department of State is the one that takes care of issues, American issues or U.S. issues outside of the United States. And this conference being outside, then that's there. But it's not too helpful, right?
No, it's not. And it was a very interesting to see that topic. Well, the other one that I also like it very much and is more interesting and it has more stuff is the one about the ocean. So if you go to topics again.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you go to the right side, the third one up from the bottom up.
Uh-huh. The ocean, yes.
Yeah. That one is really, really good and it has good resources.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I explored that one and I like
it. Mm-hmm. Okay, there you go.
Especially because as I told you, I'm going to be doing something with water.
Right.
During land.
Yes.
So there's some videos and some interesting information.
Right. As you mentioned, water, I noticed that they have one for oceans and a separate one for water. Okay, they're not necessarily the same because ocean itself is going to be precisely the ecosystems, right, of the oceans of the world. But water as such is more a focus on drinking water, water for showering, clean water, access, etc.
Where is that
water for
one?
irrigation too, right?
Irrigation, yes. Even though that may be under agriculture, I saw another tab on agriculture.
Yeah, the stuff that I found most interesting was on adaptation. I was I read some news articles too about just the setting of it being in Egypt, and so they were talking a lot about the Nile River Delta and the rise in levels and the increase in salinity in the soil, which is a problem that I wasn't really aware of. That it gets harder and harder to grow crops, and so they've begun planting rice periodically because that requires more water So they rinse the salt out of the soil as they're growing the rice, and then they can grow something else, and then they have to, rotate the crops and everything. But they're limited on that too, because the amount of water for irrigation is limited too in Egypt. So it's a snowballing problem. And that's kind of the frustrating thing of all this stuff, is you can learn more and more about the problems, but there don't really seem to be too many solutions.
Right. It's a little frustrating. I share your frustration, because it's like the list of problems gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And more complex, complicated. At some point, it's kind of, it locks and can't really see a way out of these issues. Yeah. So saltwater intrusion in general is a big challenge with sea level rise. That little graph that I posted last time, that composite composite graph of the plot of CO2 associated with human population growth, associated with sea level rise, and ice melting and so forth. Because it's a single composite graph, it had, I'm just trying to erase it here. Hold on a second. All right, point something out. Bear with me.
Father Stephen, where did you find those articles? I would like to read them.
I'll post them in the chat. I'll put links to them. Give me a sec.
Yes, we posted them. See this one. Anyway, okay. I want to mention about sea level rise, that the scale, the units for that sea level rise that parallels global warming with the CO2, right? And the melting of the ice caps is in millimeters. The unit for that one is in millimeters. Just like, for example, for CO2. Anyone remember what are the units for the CO2 graphs that we see? The plots, the units for CO2 rise?
400 ppm?
ppm, the units, right? The units, ppm, parts per million. So parts per million, you talk about critical thinking, it should tell you that's a very tiny amount, right? 1 part per million. In a million part, you have 1 green marble within a million red marbles. Hard to see, but that can make a difference. So the units for CO2 is measured in parts per million. That's a typical unit that is used for chemicals, just like we measure salinity in ppt, parts per thousand, right? Okay, the units for that sea level rise is in millimeters. Now, a millimeter is about the thickness of our toenail, right? So it's tiny, but it's real, and it's increasing. And the trend, the slope, is definitely a positive slope. Talk about probability and statistics, it's a positive slope. So it's rising. But even a few millimeters could make a difference when you have a very flat area, low-lying ground, okay, like South Florida, for example. And that's why in the other map that showed the total ice melting going to a total tropicalization, remember that little video that shows all the cities, the coastal cities of the world disappearing little by little as the ice melts totally. We go to total melt and tropicalization. Significantly, what disappears in the US? Or not disappears, it gets flooded, it goes on the ground, underwater. Yeah, the whole peninsula of Florida. Remember, the whole peninsula of Florida. The coast goes right up to Georgia. What is today, Georgia? Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's really alarming to watch, right? And when we talk about sea levels rising, that's what you imagine, is that it's loss of land. But what was, again, eye-opening to me about the Nile Delta, the agriculture there, is that just a few millimeters, it's not that we've lost the land, is that the land is becoming not farmable.
Exactly.
There's more salt in it.
Right.
So you don't have to cover over the land for it to be bad already. It's
exactly. And that's my point about the millimeters. If we actually see millimeters rising underneath the surface, right, there's saltwater intrusion. Again, I go back to South Florida because this peninsula is so unique in its ecosystem and so illustrative. Definitely, we depend on fresh water for living and for agriculture and urbanicity. And that source of fresh water ultimately is going to be from nature, right? Typically, the aquifer or the water table, which means that in the peninsula in particular, the peninsula of Florida, which we know that the limestone is very porous and is kind of like a sponge made out of calcium carbonate, rigid but porous, and it filters, the water is filtering through, right, literally under our feet, on the ground. Typically here, anywhere you dig a hole 4, 5, 6 feet and you get fresh water coming up. So there has to be a flow of fresh water outward from that sponge, right? Because the sponge essentially is immersed in salt water, which is the Gulf Coast and then the Atlantic coast. So if there's no fresh water flowing out, then what we get is saltwater intrusion because the salt water is right there at the margin. And in fact, it happens all along the coast of the Gulf into Alabama, Louisiana, all the way Texas, Mexico, etc. So we need that flow. You know, it's a dynamic system. We say dynamic system. We need that flow of fresh water outward all the time. Now, if you take that to the Nile Basin, which is very fertile, right? It's very wide. And periodically it does flood, ebb and flow, so forth. So many millions of people depend on the agriculture, basic agriculture, sometimes even what we call primary agriculture or just secondary. Primary agriculture is just gathering from the rain, whatever the rain provides, and gathering that. Secondary is to do trenches and ditches and to have some kind of water management, but it's still a primitive water management. Tertiary agriculture is to come in with more sophisticated technology like piping and valves and so forth, right? Many of those folks are really in a secondary agriculture whereby they depend a lot on just nature and natural cycles. So this gradual but real continuous fresh saltwater intrusion along the coastlines of the world is very significant, and it's very significant for a lot of people that we're not too associated with. Many people live on the coastlines of the world precisely because it tends to be more biodiversity, there's more fishing and so forth, and they depend, that's their sustenance, right? It's kind of a sustenance, it's a survival lifestyle. So it's challenging, it's alarming. So the oceans, saltwater intrusion is a major issue. And you can imagine the kind of technology that is needed to hold back the ocean, right? The Dutch have been able to do it with a lot of technology, with the dikes and so forth. They actually have claimed, I think maybe 50% of Holland used to be underwater, more or less, something like that, which is amazing. It's very flat there. But, you know, it's high technology and so forth. And they have profited from that because now those fields, which are very fertile, they grow mostly tulips, which provide tulips for the world. So they've made a whole industry out of it. And I guess that subsidizes those dams and dikes, right? But it is expensive, challenging. They get breached periodically. Think of the hurricanes in Texas, Louisiana. So the ocean, saltwater, it's a big issue. Freshwater itself, you know, because ultimately we depend from the rain and from that cycle. More and more water is used from agriculture. Well, agriculture sooner or later puts it back into the land. But urbanicity is it's a different challenge, right? Because by using water in the urban areas, then the end result of that water is sewer, which should not be pumped directly back into the ground, has to be processed and treated and so forth. And eventually that water could return to the cycle, but not without a lot of processing, therefore technology, right? When we talk about technology, we talk about expense. And not everyone has, every country or NGOs have the capacity for that expense. What are some other issues that you saw coming up? I want to point out also some basic things like NGO. First of all, the members, right? Because it's Conference of the Parties. So picking up on parties, who are the parties? This is not a Christmas party or a birthday party, right? That party is a different connotation. Who are the parties?
To the Paris Agreement?
Yes, from the Paris Agreement, right? And even before then, because it goes back, it's 27, and there's been one every year. We count back, actually, I think it goes back to the Rio Declaration, 95. So 95 plus 27 is 2022, right? It'll be 7.
Yeah, 27.
Yeah, 27. So it really goes back, I think, to the Rio Declaration in 95, which was the big one on precisely Rio, the Amazon basin, all that. So that was the big awakening, if you will, trying to pump out into the general public the scientific data that was already accumulating about climate change and so forth.
I'm surprised that of the list of NGOs. I went through it.
Yeah.
And you'd think with like the United States' resources and just in terms of being a global economic leader, that I feel like you see just as many of these NGO organizations from Europe and other places as you would from the United States. Like the United States, for the economic resources that they have, doesn't seem to represent well our country. Like, yes, there are a lot of American organizations involved, but I feel like it's disproportionate. I mean, I haven't done a statistical analysis of it, but it seems like other countries seem to have a bigger stake. Like, for instance, France.
Yes.
For being a much smaller nation than our country, seems to be very invested in this as opposed to the United States. And that just seems a little troubling.
Right, yes. Okay, you bring up a good point, Father Dan. First, staying on this parties issue, what I wanted to mention, and you mentioned it, NGOs, sometimes we take it for granted, but again, those acronyms are not familiar to everybody necessarily. So NGO, can anyone tell me from the youth present, what is an NGO? You familiar with that term, the acronym? NGO?
Isn't that like non-profit organizations?
Non-governmental organizations, NGO, non-governmental, which obviously is stating that there is a governmental organizations. Now, what are the governmental organizations? It has to do with, I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong. Governmental, govern, the G, governmental. It's a reference to government. And reference to government is nation or country.
Right, it'd be like the Environmental Protection Agency.
Not necessarily, no, because those would fall in within the nation. So this is how it works. Basically, you have governments and you have NGOs in the UN, all right? So governments are the governments of the world. Nations, countries, kingdoms, etc., right? Which are close to 200, around there, 190 something, I believe it is. And those are members of the UN voluntarily. I know for a fact, for example, the Vatican is not an actual member of the UN. The Vatican is a country in its own right. That's why President Reagan, for example, established diplomatic relations between the US and the Vatican. Because the Vatican, aside from being a religious state, is also a secular state. It has its own law. And it's one of the few countries, maybe the only country, that is a city, a state, and a nation all in the same property. The same, what is it about, is it 16 acres or something like that? The size, very small. Anyway, it's a country recognized by many, many other countries of the world. We have, the Vatican has diplomatic relations with practically every country of the world. And the equivalent of the embassy of the Vatican is called what we have in Washington, nunciature, apostolic nunciature, right? And it's, for example, in the US, it's in Washington because it's in the capital. But the Vatican is not, by choice, is not a permanent member of the UN. It's a permanent observer. It's a permanent observer. So it has voice, but no vote. But they have a big voice and a strong voice, and is particularly under Pope Francis, but every Pope really. And so we have representation. The Vatican, the Catholic Church has representation at the UN, but it's a non-voting member. It has it's a permanent observer, right? So we have the right to, the Vatican has the right to participate in all the discussion and everything else, but doesn't vote. Anyway, the other governments of the world, the vast majority are members with voting rights, etc. And then there's an increasing number of organizations that are not governmental, all right? Many of them are environmental organizations, but not all. And there are hundreds of them. At this point, maybe thousands, but certainly hundreds. And they also participate actively in the UN, and they can even have voting rights, right? I noticed one news item that I saw early on was that the COP27 was being flooded with oil lobbyists from OPEC and other oil-producing countries, right? Lobbying for their cause. In other words, for continuing to use fossil fuels one way or another. And if they associate as an NGO, then they have a right to participate, right? And so that was one thing, talk about the complexity, but everyone basically has a voice and they have to make their arguments. So NGOs are non-governmental organizations, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them who participate. They're typically focus groups, interest groups, and many of them are environmental, but not all. All right. Dr. Jose, very bad connection. Sorry. I'm very sorry, but it's just echoing vibration, cannot really discern what you're saying. I wonder if you can just call in, maybe. Yes. If you can hear us, maybe just phone in to my phone.
You can open the
Okay, there's the call. Okay, Dr. Jose, yes, thanks for calling.
Yes, right. I'm not sure who can hear me, but I was just...
Okay, I have you on speaker in my cell phone here. It's a little low, but we can hear. Go ahead.
I hear very bad connection, so I'm sorry.
Yes.
But I was saying, if you go on the website, there's a tab called Climate Action.
Yes, I saw that. Let's go there.
And if you click on that, it'll actually show you all the actors in a world map. You can click on the number, and it'll show you which ones are city governments, which ones are countries, which ones are organizations, investors, and it breaks it down.
Excellent. Which one of the, I'm there now, but I'm looking at the pull-down menu, introduction, action,
it's on the top. It's called the Climate Action.
Yeah, I'm in that tab now. I'm looking at the menu. I'm just reading through the pull-down menu here. We'll start with the first one. Let's see, introduction. By the way, Father Steve posted on the chat some sites, some articles, looks like mostly nature, some nature articles and some others from newspaper. Okay, we'll get to the
Reuters article is the one that has the saline content in the soil.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Your references.
I think it's Nazca.
It's a Nazca, yeah, NACCA.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see it. Yes. All right. I agree. Whatever. There we go. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And if you look at that, it's very interesting. United States has about 3,091 overall actors. The other two or three are France and Italy. But the rest of the world is
right.
That one of the find here is the financial investment by the countries. And I believe the United States is one of the highest financial investments.
It is.
In environmental and global climate action than any other country.
Yes.
But you look at other industrial areas or other population areas, China and Russia, they're basically non-actors. They are policy. They have policy, but they are not active. And I think that's a problem.
Right. So talk about equity, right? Which is a big topic always in the UN. They're always looking for equity, inclusion, and so forth. All right. A few comments about this map itself. Thank you. This is very informative. All right. So I have it projected here. It talks about 30,000, close to 31,000 actors. All right. What's the first thing that when we look at tables and graphs and figures to interpret something like this? For example, just at first blush, where are most of the dots geographically? In what continent or what?
In Africa.
Actually, I would say it's mostly in Europe. There's more density here.
Okay.
Right? Per geography. And least density.
I do. The thing is that in my iPad, it's a little crunchier, so probably that's why.
Okay. Yeah, and then a further complication is this is flat, but really it should be three-dimensional, right? It would be spherical. But barring that, on the opposite end, the least dots are by geography, Canada, the US, and Russia, which actually spans about 12 time zones or 24 time zones. So I'm just trying to point out that sometimes graphs or plots or figures are deceiving to look at when we look at just physical geography because of territory, all right? There are other ways of representing this, which are not physical geography maps, but political geography maps, where every country is simply one dot or one square or one triangle like that, and they're all connected, so that the geography itself, the physical terrain geography, is not deceptive. But then looking at the actual numbers. Oh, another thing I wanted to point out that I saw, interesting that Europe has the largest concentration by density of dots, in other words, actors or agents. They're also participating in the COP as a block, as a unit, all of Western Europe, all right? Basically the EU, which also means that the UK is not part of that block because they did the Brexit thing. So I talk about complexities. But the rest of the EU is participating as a block. And they had made a statement previously that if the conference was not going to come out with some substantial reductions, they were going to walk out as a block. So that's a lot of political power because together, the EU also is a major contributor of the finances, like Dr. Jose was saying, of the finances. But yes, the US is one of the main contributors of the finances, and one of the least contributors of the finances are China, Russia, and India, which are three of the main contributors of greenhouse gases, right? Which, by the way, is not only CO2, there's something else about methane, Did anyone look at methane going from the hydrosphere to the atmosphere? Anyone look at methane? It was in the discourse. So going back to the parties, if you press highlight the dot, tell you about numbers.
Father Chofi, if you touch the tabs in the left, it will show you. Yes, go to investors just so you can see what Dr. Martinez
investors, there you go. Okay. Oh, the map changes, is that it? Or this one? Oh, I see the dots changing.
Yeah, and that's the investors. That's what he's saying, that United States is
the numbers. Okay, the numbers change within. Yes, the numbers change. Right, I see. Okay, yeah. So this is a site that will require quite a bit of exploration. It's a crunch. It's a summary. I was talking about methane because so governments that did participate, you would think that if a president goes of a country, a president of a country goes to the conference, right? Is very significant, very important. Just to consider the security detail, for example, for the safety of a president to participate in this conference. But beyond that, it obviously shows a big commitment on the part of that country, right? A president or a prime minister or a king, if they have, if it's a monarchy, etc. Did President Biden go to the conference? Anybody know? Anybody look it up? Okay, he did, and he gave a speech, and it's online. You can read it, and there he talks about a lot of the economy and that $1 trillion thing that passed in Congress a few months ago, right? That was part of it. That was a big part of his discourse. He's pushing a lot green in the U.S. right now, the current administration, right? And alternative fuels and so forth. It's part, in my opinion, I think it's part of the recession because now fuel is costing more for industry to make the same product. And we're paying for that because then the industry passes it on to the consumer one way or another, right? And that causes inflation. So it's not insignificant consequences. Basically, the overall is that the lifestyle that we try to maintain gets more expensive. But in there I saw, and then I checked out the reference, this fact checking. He mentions that methane, how does methane equate with CO2, for example? We're focusing a lot on the CO2 and the 400 ppm and all that. How does methane equate? It's another greenhouse gas, right? At least that, we covered it. So it's part of the atmosphere. It's very small amount in the atmosphere, but it's high impact. It's like, hormones are very tiny amounts in the body that have a big impact on the body. And so methane is about 80 times more powerful than CO2 for global warming. 80 times for the same particle per million, one particle per million of CO2, one particle per million of methane is equivalent to 84 parts per million of CO2. So it's 80 times more powerful. And there's less methane produced, but so methane is used in what generally? Natural gas for cooking, for example. A lot of people have gas cooking, right? It's also used in industry. What's another one that is not methane? It's also natural gas. Propane also, right? Butane, those are gases that are used sometimes for cooking. Many countries use them. That requires pipes on the ground, even for cities that provide gas, so forth. Now, gas is hard to contain because it essentially takes up the size of the container. And if there's a little tiny, if there's a microscopic crack, leak, that's a leak, right? And they have discovered somewhere, I saw, I've been reading so much stuff, I can't put my point on the source, but somewhere I saw that maybe there may be about 50% leakage of methane throughout the world in the systems that they use, for all the way from the big containers where they store it out somewhere in the country or on a ship, all the way from that methane to get to the house when I'm cooking on my gas stove, or to get to industry, wherever it's going to be used or consumed. There's a lot of piping and containers that they have to go through, even just the containers that we take for the barbecue, right? So it's estimated that maybe up to 50% of methane is escaping through little leaks, microscopic leaks. 50, half, you know. It's like that statistic that I said, that we produce about 4 times more food that is necessary to feed the world. We, the world, the agricultural community, produces 4 times more food that is needed to feed the whole world. But half of that is lost to critters, to fungi, bacteria, and mice and rodents, right? Half of it is lost because of the storage conditions are not ideal. So we have something similar with methane, and that's kind of a discovery. It's so capillary. Talk about complexity again, Father Stephen. That's so capillary, right? And the leaks of methane throughout the world. Some may be huge, where they have these big containers where it's stored, but some may be just at my stove, where the fitting is old and I haven't checked it in several years, and I haven't put soap water around it to see the bubbles, the little tiny bubbles. So challenges all over the place, right? And that's the like industrial methane, or that's the, let's say, the human factor methane, right? The methane that is being processed somehow. There's another whole bag of methane that is natural and is trapped. It's equivalent to the CO2 that is sunk. Remember, we talked about sinking CO2 or carbon stock. Remember the budget, the 4 gigatons net excess of CO2 that's accumulated per year, right? That carbon budget. Well, there's something similar with methane. Where's methane trapped mostly? And this map is illustrative. It's very cold, and the gas is literally trapped at the molecular level in bogs underground, mostly Siberia and what is known as the northern territories of Canada, which is this part. They're huge coniferous forests there. And then beyond that, beyond the taiga, you get into the tundra. The tundra region, remember, is permafrost. What is permafrost? The ground is frozen. So therefore, trees cannot grow there because the roots cannot go through the ice. And then you have mosses and lichens and a few herbs that can stand those cold conditions, right? Siberia, this whole northern swath of Siberia, huge territories up there, and northern Canada, what again is known as the northern territories. Not so much Greenland. Why not Greenland? Because what does Greenland have on top of it, mostly?
A glacier.
A glacier, a huge glacier. I'll show you videos of it, the water melting and running through into those holes, remember? So it's mostly glacier, so there's not much significant tundra there. But these two areas, yes, and you can see it's a large percentage of the world's geography. That's melting, so the permafrost is melting. The bogs are liquefying, and just like the historic, remember how we determined the paleoclimatology of CO2? What do we find paleoclimatology of CO2? The tubes of what? Ice cores, right? What's in the ice core? Little tiny bubbles, sometimes microscopic bubbles of CO2 trapped. But what happens when that core melts? If the core melts, that CO2 bubble is released, gassed into the atmosphere or into the chamber, wherever the thing melted. Well, take that reasoning to nature outside into these bogs of peat moss. When it liquefies, when that ice liquefies, what happens to a lot of methane is trapped there. A lot of methane is trapped there. That methane is released into the atmosphere. Go trap it, impossible. The only way to trap it is to keep the permafrost permanently frozen. So that's a big issue there. That accelerates, and then as more methane is released, what happens? 80 times more powerful than CO2, so a faster warming. Faster warming will produce more melting, and you get a feedback mechanism, what is known as a positive feedback mechanism. The warmer the atmosphere, the more it melts, the more it melts, the more methane is released, which makes it even warmer, right? So these are feedback mechanisms. So another layer of complexity added to it.
Father Chofi.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, one at a time. One at a time. Hold on for a moment, Christina. They also expel some methane. Yes, right. So animals do expel methane mostly through. Well, the scientific word for it is flatulation. Okay, it's an end product of digestion. Is the gas component of digestion, which comes out the back end. But that is not a big problem up there. That is a problem mostly where? In animal husbandry, in cattle. So much so that I read somewhere else that some governments are considering taxing cattle flatulation, essentially. In other words, farmers who raise cattle and get money for the beef and the milk would have to pay a certain tax according to the number of cattle heads that they have because of the methane that is being released by the process of what? Fermentation, chewing the cud, right? They have to chew grass, and they have to ruminate. They have several chambers to their stomach in order to digest, because we animals, we don't digest cellulose directly, right? We don't have the enzyme. What's the enzyme that digests cellulose? Cellulase, right? Remember the enzymes, which are proteins, when they end in ASE, that's an enzyme, right? So the enzyme that digests cellulose is cellulase. We don't have it, we don't make it, we don't produce it. Bacteria produce it. I guess maybe some fungi, decomposers, saprophytes. That's how they decompose organic material. And I think, but it's mostly the intestinal gut, the intestinal flora, the little microorganisms that we have inside our stomach and the intestines. And this is true especially for cattle, herbivores, which have large biomass, and all they eat is grass all day long. So they have to ruminate, they have to chew that cud and keep it inside their stomach. Their stomach becomes a fermentation tank, essentially, to try to get some nutrient out of that, break it. But that produces a lot of gas, right? That gas is methane, goes out. And when you have a large concentration, where you have hundreds or maybe thousands of steer head or cattle in a particular area, that produces a lot of methane also, significant methane. Yeah. Right. Okay, Christina, please.
Well, I'm not so sure what I'm going to ask is correct, but isn't it true that gas is cheaper than electricity? I mean, and I'm talking about for cooking, right?
Yes, so at the consumer end, you're talking about natural gas at the consumer end, right? At the home, at least for us in the United States, I think, yeah, no, definitely it is.
But this is what I'm thinking. If we're talking about urbanization and metropolis and the cities, right, and all this that we're talking, I remember when we bought this house, I don't know, 22 years ago. Here, we don't have gas pipes.
Right, so from the city, you mean from the city?
Yeah, but then other neighborhoods that were built after, they begin to do it, so they will be cheaper. So it is complicated because then you're trying to make it more accessible for people in a regular basis, but in the other hand, it's very damaging to the environment. So, but electricity is extremely expensive, and it's also related to fossils and all that. So it's very complicated, Father. I know in
really
Colombia, gas is probably, and Colombia is a producer of gas and carbon and all that. So it's kind of very difficult, complex to live.
Christina, we also produce a lot of coal. COAL.
Right, coal.
It's a rock also.
Right, it's a solid.
Exactly, it's a solid that has a lot of methane.
That has methane in it? Yeah. Right, and when it's processed, that methane is released.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, it's literally, that's why we say that fossil fuel industry is a dirty industry in not only in the fact that if we get, you know, embarrado, if we can get tar, it's dirty, but also figuratively in the sense that there are a lot of gases that come out that have to be filtered. Mm-hmm. Yes. So in the United States, actually, we have one of the largest deposits of natural gas. I remember seeing this in the news a few years ago, mostly in the Midwest, underground. It's one of the largest deposits of natural gas in the world. And that's potentially a richness, right? Because it has a market value, a high market value. It's natural gas. In my mind, so what do you think would be, and even, so you mentioned electricity. Let me continue on electricity, because how do you think that FPL, for example, produces electricity?
Don't they do it through, I think it's two things, either water or and also they have, well, that's what I think.
Doesn't FPL solar?
Yeah, Florida, FPL, Florida Power and Light, right? We don't have significant mountains in Florida, and therefore hydroelectric. Do you think hydroelectric is a big producer of electricity in Florida? Not hydroelectric, right? I'm talking about dams for turbines. We have to get a turbine somehow, a generator, to turn to generate electricity. We don't have significant mountains here and rivers that are strong enough to run these turbines. Then they use gas and coal, right? And oil, petroleum. In other words, we're back to fossil fuels. Exactly. They have some farms, they have some solar farms, solar panels, farms, and they also use that heating. They remember the heating tower that gets heated by to white hot from mirrors. Remember we talked about that way back? The mirrors that project into a heating bulb, and then that white hot is transmitted down, that heat is transmitted down to generate steam, and then with steam, they can generate electricity, right? The generator can turn. So that's also clean, and there are some farms of that, I believe, kind of in Central Florida, but it's still expensive. The technology is expensive, so it doesn't pay off that much. That's why FPL is always looking for energy from electricity from the right. Thank you for the point. Right. I'll get to nuclear in a minute. But FPL is always looking for electricity from the consumer. So if you put up panels, for example, solar panels in your home, you can pump that electricity into the grid when you're not using it and so forth. Excess. That's another source. Yes, nuclear is another source. Thank you for that, Dr. Martinez. Down south near Homestead, there is, we call it Turkey Point, right? It's a nuclear plant. It's, I believe, still active, right? It's one of those older generators, generation. I don't know if it's 1 or 2. I don't think it's a generation 3. I confess my ignorance there. but it may be, I've heard that periodically they have to shut it down for maintenance and so forth and repairs. So that may get replaced at some point. Replacing a nuclear plant is pretty expensive, but then it pays off over time. But more than the actual expense of nuclear plants, what's the issue with nuclear plants? To get the millions of dollars to build one.
Well, that a city can get very affected by.
Popularity, right? Popularity is a perception that if we have a fourth nuclear accident, there've been 3 big ones, remember? One in the US, one in
Russia?
Ukraine, exactly. Chernobyl. And then the one in Japan, Fukushima, and the one here at 3 Mile Island, way back decades ago. So those, of course, had world news exposure, and therefore it's not a popular thing.
How clean is nuclear energy, though? Like, is it cleaner than fossil fuels?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Now, especially when we look at generation 3 and 4 generators, right? The 3rd and 4th generation of plants, which are much more efficient, much more safe. They have more redundancy of shutdown and so forth. So my understanding is that generation 3, but especially 4, is essentially impossible. The probability, talk about probability of having a nuclear accident, is down to the infinitesimal, all right? Because they have, with technology, they have shutdown mechanisms way before the core, actually the melting of the core. And in fact, the rods are used up totally, so there's essentially no nuclear waste with spent rods, and no need to bury them for centuries until the half-life decay occurs and all that, right? But they do, they produce a lot. Remember the equation, the whole nuclear field or universe is based a lot on one little equation, right? E equals mc squared. What does E stand for? Energy. It's electricity energy. Electricity is energy. It's nuclear energy, right? So the big E is all that energy. What is, let's bracket M for a moment. What is C? C is the universal constant, lowercase c. What is the universal constant? The fastest thing in the universe that we have discovered so far? A photon, the speed of light, right? So c is a constant, is the speed of light. And what does this little 2 mean? What does the superscript 2 mean? mc squared. What do we do to the speed of light? We square it. What does that mean, to square a number? To multiply it by itself. What is the speed of light? 300,000 what? Kilometers per second. I have a photon between my fingers. I release a photon. In 1 second, what's a second? 101, or for tag football, 1 Mississippi, right? Release a photon. In 1 second, that same photon, this photon is how far away? 300,000 kilometers away. Insane, but real, right? Okay, now square that. Means 3 times 3 is 9. And 10 to the 5 times 5, 25. No, we add them, 10. All right, so 9 times 10 to the 10. That's the constant. We multiply that times m, right? What is m? Lowercase m, little humble lowercase m means mass. Mass is what the scale gives me when I weigh myself before or after the shower. That's mass. Not weight, because weight would be mass times the constant of gravity on the surface of the earth, right? Okay, so mass, 150, let's say 100 kilos. multiply 100 kilos times 3 to the times 10 to the 10. That's the amount of energy produced in 100 kilos, or 1 kilo. In other words, a humongous amount of energy in a very little tiny mass, of any mass that is material. It's a lot of energy stored in there, and that's atomic energy. So yes, nuclear energy can be very efficient. It's sophisticated to harness it. Therefore, technology, therefore, expensive. And also, if there's technology, there's economics. If there's economics, there's politics, right? Look at, I don't know if you've been following the issue with Germany. Did I mention about Germany? And so Prime Minister Merkel, right? I think to have a vote of confidence at one point, she decided that they were going to essentially shut down the nuclear plants in Germany, which were producing a lot of their energy. And the country was kind of divided into two geographically. Germany, in here somewhere, which would be Germany. I think this one, 409. Yeah, that's Germany. Okay. So you see, it has coast to the North Sea, the North Atlantic. Here's the UK. That should be Ireland. Yep. And then the rest of Germany is embedded into central continental Europe. Anyway, it has a lot of mountain ranges, mostly in the south. And there's this fairly large exposure of coastline to the north, to North Sea. The North Atlantic is a very strong ocean there because it's channeled. The English Channel would be here, I guess. But this region, all that water gets channeled through there, and it also affects the wind, the atmosphere above it. So anyway, long and short is that there are strong winds here, ideal for the air turbines, the wind turbines. And the south, since it has a lot of mountain ranges, for hydro. So basically, a decision was taken under Merkel's administration, energy-wise, to divide the country into two, more or less, horizontally. So the northern half would be powered mostly by wind turbines, and the southern half would be powered mostly by hydroelectric. Okay. But they still had to import fossil fuel. They had to import petroleum, and I'm sure coal and natural gas also, for running their industry. Then the war in Ukraine broke out, and a lot of that petroleum got cut off. And it was not sufficient for the wind turbines and the hydroelectrics to run the whole country. So the current regime is reopening a number of nuclear plants.
Now that Russia is blocking the gas, then
also gas.
Yeah.
Right.
Russia was selling them.
Was selling gas, and they blocked that.
They blocked it, so they need power for another.
Exactly. Okay. So another layer of complication, and Germany is a major world producer, world power, nuclear power, et cetera, So these are the issues, and who could have told that Ukraine war is going to explode and cause all the damage and chaos that is causing?
Father, one of the things that got my attention was the sustainable aviation fuels.
Yes, right.
I was very surprised about it, because it says that this is comprising 10 or 15% of fuels globally by 2030.
Right.
The question I have is why they don't use it now, especially for regular cars. Why they don't, if there is good, and this is less contaminated and help with the goal for global warming.
Yes.
Why they, for example, United States, they have the capacity to produce a lot, because it says here that they can produce 50 to 60 billion gallons of low carbon feedback biofuels in a year. So I don't know why they're going to start using it.
Where are you now? What site are you?
This is from the...
It's a new site?
From the conference, it says here.
Okay.
Sustainable aviation fuels. And I went to another site that it says that an estimated 1 million dry tons of biomass can be collected sustainably each year in the United States.
Okay, let me try to raise that for the rest of the group, especially the folks online. Is it one of the blue tabs? Or can you trace your...
I'm here in the...
Can you trace which of the tabs you went through?
Summary of global climate action.
Yeah. Climate...
It says summary, climate action, COP27.
Yeah, I saw that one. So let me see if it's here. I remember seeing that at one point, process and meetings. Do you remember which of the tabs it was? Sending me the link?
Yeah,
so what you did? Yeah, okay, go ahead. We can try that. Yeah, sometimes when you start going into these links, we get so far away from the original one, it's hard to trace it back. But anyway, while that comes through, we talk about biofuel, we talk about flying, like air fuel. We talk about air fuel. Yeah, okay. Keep in mind that air fuel is more refined than the car or truck fuel, all right? Air fuel is much more refined, and to my knowledge, it produces more CO2. It's precisely because more CO2 flying. That's one argument that has been made. In fact, at the beginning of the conference, I remember, oh, it's a PDF. I click on it. Maybe double. It's a PDF. Open in new tab. Let's try that. Yes, I remember at the beginning of the conference, a number of these dignitaries, of course, most people flew in, right? And so there was already a criticism there that these people who are so concerned about climate action and climate warming, why are they flying in? Because fossil jet fuel produces a lot of CO2, more than car fuel. So some activists, for example, have given up flying. Well, how do you get to another country if you don't fly? You have to take a boat. And the least contaminant will be a sailboat, but that's going to take a few weeks to get there.
That's why
it's not accurate.
These people that they are against the global warming, but they have private jets. And they use so they have private jets, they go here and there, but they are
Right. I remember when Laudato Si came out in 2015, right? The first encyclical in the Catholic Church about the environment and the concern for the environment, of course, and for the poor. Someone said, well, then why is the Pope flying, right? Why is the Pope using a jet to get here and there? First of all, he doesn't fly that much to begin with, but he does. So it's challenging.
The situation says that the goal of sustainable aviation fuels comprising 10 to 15% of fuels globally by 2030. It's good. It's a nice, I like that.
Right.
And I was surprised that the United States produces that much energy, you know, so 50 to 60 million gallons a year.
Right.
And it's based on corn oil, corn grain, oil seeds.
Yeah, the biofuel that we talked about. So exactly. Biofuel is renewable resource in the sense that we can grow the crops, right? But it also has an impact on the economy, on agriculture, because now what happens with farmers? What sector of the economy does it affect negatively? The biofuel production. Which sector? You remember? traditionally, so what's one example of biofuel that is used? Mention it.
Yeah, the corn grain.
Corn grain is typically the most abundant one, right? Fairly easy to grow, et cetera. But when corn is diverted for making biofuel through fermentation, instead of what? Traditionally, corn is used, especially in the Midwest, for, aside for human consumption, yes, but we can't eat that much corn. Who else eats the corn?
Cattle food. The cattle food.
Cattle, right? It is for animal husbandry. But now farmers, remember, farmers are getting more money for the corn, for biofuel, than for cattle, for feeding cattle, for selling it to ranchers, right? So what happens to ranchers? Now it's more expensive to feed the same cow for that.
They cannot buy.
And they're going to pass down the cost. So meat in general becomes more expensive. They pass it down. Or the government has to subsidize, right? Which could increase taxes in other ways. So again, biofuel is not without its, yeah. It is. It's always a dynamic system of balancing. And we have to look at the net. If the net result is a positive, eliminating the other, the downside, right?
In the other hand, how much land you need to have all these productions.
Yes, exactly.
Why?
Generally, yes, because of agriculture is on the surface of
so we take a lot of this land,
agricultural land. Yeah.
That we have from agriculture.
Yes.
So in one point is, I know it's a difficult situation to have this increase of the weather climate, the problem that we have for the weather. But in the other hand, it's been so much difficult to, for example, let's make an example. For example, President Biden, he comes there with a lot of oil from Canada, right? But he's going to ask other countries to produce more for our consumption. So, in the sense that if you are asking other countries to produce more oil, that we produce more contamination,
right,
for our consumption, it doesn't make sense, because if you are trying to do a green energy production,
right,
it's not based on fossil oils, how come you're trying to reinforce that in the United States, in the whole world, but you go to another country to try to increase production of the same contaminants? So it doesn't make sense.
Right. You know? And perhaps, depending on what country it is, perhaps with less filters, fewer filters that Canada would have, right? Because I would think that Canada would be up and up on their environmental protection, so they would have the filters in place, as opposed to maybe another OPEC country that doesn't have either the willpower or the technological wherewithal to filter, right? To filter the oil production. Yeah. Complexity. It's complex. One thing that I saw encouraging, one aspect that I saw here was technology was, there was a whole session on technology. Richard Carey, he's the rep, the US rep for this. He's also a controversial figure, pros and cons, but he's, at least for the US, the rep. This is on technology, right? And commitment from more technologically advanced countries, a commitment to the less technological countries to help and to provide technology, try to level the playing field. I don't know that that field is ever going to be fully leveled throughout all the countries of the world, but at least certainly we are a very technological country, and we can at least provide that either knowledge about the technology or the technology itself or how to build it, so that more safety systems are in place, precisely like filters and so forth, when there is processing the fossil fuels. Okay, so it's a big commitment on the part of technology. It is expensive, but here the more technological countries of the world, what we call the technologically advanced world, which is mostly going to be North America, including Canada, and Europe, and then a few other countries around the rest of the world, to provide that possibility, that know-how. Okay. When we look at the bigger picture, but somehow, I keep mentioning that over the millions of species that we have on Earth, no other species has an impact on the planet like we do, right? There's one species, Homo sapiens, is producing all this complexity. Now, we could ask the kind of the philosophical and theological question, because this is bioethics. Is there a way out of this? Are we basically doomed, or what? Are we destroying ourselves if we play it forward? If this, let's say we play it forward with climate change and it continues to accelerate in this sixth mass extinction that is anthropogenic. Those terms should be familiar to you by now, right? So if we talk about sixth mass extinction, it means that there have been 5 others. The last one about 10 to 12,000 years ago, over which we had nothing to do. Severally, we didn't have the technology to produce it. But what do we know after a mass extinction that happens, at least from the previous 5 and the fossil record?
New life comes.
Yes, typically an expansive radiation, right? Remember those terms? Expansive radiation. After a mass extinction, with some time, new niches open up. The classical one is the death of the dinosaurs and the rise of the mammals, including the human. And so there is this expansive radiation, new niches that open up by the extinction of other species. So we could foresee, if we play it forward, one hypothetical scenario, like in the worst case scenario, would be if we play out fully this 6th mass extinction. If it plays out totally, what would be at the other end of it after the mass extinction finally occurs, which could take several hundred or 100,000 years? What would be at the other side? As has happened before, if there's some life left around, that life will continue to evolve, because it's kind of hardwired that that life expands, right? Look at the species. Are there more genus? Are there more genera or more species? Think about that question. That's an empirical question. Throughout the world, genus and species, right? What's the species for human? Homo sapiens. What's the genus? Homo. That's the genus, right? Scientifically. Now, we're the only, sapiens is the only Homo that is existing today. What did I show you on the fossil record? There are at least 5 or 6 other Homo that were not sapiens. Neanderthalis, Erectus, Heidelbergensis, etc., right? Habilis. So, are there more genus or species?
More species.
More species. Now, what's up from the genus? Family, right? Family. So, are there more families or genera in the phylogenetic tree? Are there more families or genera by the numbers?
More genera.
More genera. If there are more species and genera, there's more genera than families. What goes up from the family? Remember, phylum, class, order, kingdom, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, right? There has to be order in the class in order to be able to teach. So up from family is order, going up, okay? So are there more families or orders? More families or orders? Or families? Are there more orders or classes? More orders than classes, etc. Right? We play it up all the way up. When we get to what's the largest, the most inclusive category? There are only three. The domain. Remember domain? Domain. Eukaryotes, prokaryotes, and archaea. Okay, that's the most inclusive, right? And the least inclusive or the most restrictive? Species. 2 million classified so far, an estimated 10 to 20 million that we haven't discovered. All right, so obviously, you see, so in the phylogenetics, you see the expansive radiation. It's obvious, we see it there, you know. A tiger is not a lion, it's not a puma, it's not a leopard, but they're all felines. It's not a domestic cat, but they're all felidae, they're all felines, okay? So there's expansive radiation that occurs with time. It's kind of hardwired into nature. If some species is living on Earth and the climate is kind of stable, the expectation is that that species will eventually evolve into 2 or more other species with time, give it enough time. So it's kind of hardwired into nature to be expansive. But we have these catastrophic events that happen periodically, which wipe out and cause a mass extinction. But they don't cause a total 100% extinction. Even if it's just bacteria. Remember, we have the extremophile bacteria, that some actually live in boiling water, some live in very salt water, some extremophiles, some actually enjoy ultraviolet radiation. And then you have the polyextremophiles that have several characteristics at once. So life is kind of embedded into at least the crust of the earth. Mm-hmm. And therefore, given time after the next catastrophe, there would be new life coming forth. What's the big question? If that scenario happens, what species would make it through or not? The human. Will we make it? You know, will we make it? It's totally open question. And if we do make it, who will make it? Those who are buried deep into caves with 100 years reserve of food and water, etc. Right? Because the atmosphere is totally contaminated. I mean, I'm playing one of these apocalyptic scenarios, but this issue of climate change, it's accelerating. It's not just speed, it's acceleration. It's a big unknown. But to me, at least, the big question, philosophically and theologically, you know, are we going to survive ourselves? We're going to figure it out. Or are we going to, in this process of kind of the current lifestyle that we have, destroy? We could also consider that a good percentage of the population would be destroyed, but a few people will still be around. Who do you think will still be around after one of these big catastrophes?
Well, Father Chofi,
Yes.
It's a very difficult reflection. However, I think that education will be seriously one of our priorities right now, because in the governmental side, there's not really much we can do. There's so much politics, and unfortunately, you know, I mean, we could influence. I'm not saying that we can't.
Yeah. I mean, last time I looked, we still live in a democracy, right?
No. I believe we could. No. I'm not saying that I lost hope. I'm saying that the more, in my opinion, you're asking, you know, I think education beginning to really, because our children are so accustomed to so much waste and consumption.
Right.
And not thinking seriously about the next generations and what can be done. But I also think that technology and education and inspiring those minds to perhaps come with some kind of solution within the next, I don't know, 25, 30 years, to see what else can, what alternative, maybe 15 years, I don't know, what
Right.
alternatives can be, arising from these serious environmental issues. But I think definitely education. I remember seeing one documentary when I was doing Laudato Si workshop with a group of adults, and I don't remember exactly if it was Sweden or Switzerland. There was the one that had a serious, the country that had a serious explosion. It wasn't a nuclear, but it was something similar. And after that, the government, and it took the government, really made a complete rethinking. And now in that country, they recycle to the point that they even tea, how do you call it?
Tea bags.
Yes,
Tea bags.
they separate the staple, the thread.
Wow.
It is incredible. But the cleaning of the atmosphere and the air and the education, now children know what to do. But it requires a lot. And I don't think it's going to happen immediately.
Yeah.
And so anyway, in my side, I think that what I can contribute at this point, more than anything, is beginning to do some education about that. However,
yeah, right on.
Let me just say my last comment, because I'm going to be, I think the church, the Catholic Church, at the local level, it's very reluctant in the leadership. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about some lay people that are completely reluctant to start up in these discussions. They don't want to think about climate change, and they think it's a complete lie. Thank you, Father.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that's exactly where I wanted to take it, really. To me, it boils down to one word that, for me, is extremely significant, which is conscience. The conscience, the human conscience. We're the only ones that have it, seemingly, from all the other species on this planet. And it's ultimately the conscience that guides us to the left, to the right, to, up or down, wherever we go. It's the decisions we make, right? Guides our behavior. And there's consciousness and there's unconsciousness. So we say that is an unconscious activity, meaning that it should not be done. And conscience is a compound word, conciencia, which means with science, in other words, with knowledge. So right on with regards to education, I would take it a little further, one step further than just education. In other words, education of the conscience, not just intellectual education, right? But formation, what we call formation, character formation. Mature, responsible behavior is the toughest one. It's the one that sooner or later involves some sacrifice. Think of the commingled waste, right? I remember when I was in my 20s studying biology at FIU in the 70s, that we had to separate. There was recycling occurring already, and we had to separate. Any of you remember separating? The papers and the newspapers went in one bin, and then the glass bottles, the beer bottles and all that we drank went in another bin, and the cans that we were eating, that went in another bin. Anyone remember separating? Now it's what? It's called the big green container, the big commingled, right? Remember commingled? What does commingled mean? That all the artificial stuff, non-food, goes in there. right? Commingled. So the can, the beer bottle, the newspaper, all goes into the one big container. Why? And so what does the industry have to do? What does waste management or whatever other garbage agency is collecting? They have to separate. Obviously, they have to separate because they process the plastic different than they process the glass, et cetera, or the metal. But we couldn't do it. In other words, it didn't. We were not doing it. You know, we're throwing bottles into the can container. We're throwing cans into the paper container and so forth. And therefore, the industry said, "Folks, you're incapable of doing this, so we're going to do it for you." Right now, it's commingled, but it's not working that well. They can't really make a profit out of it necessarily, et cetera, et cetera. We saw that Cincinnati, or where was it? Was it in Cincinnati or Pennsylvania? No, the Pennsylvania. Remember I showed you a little video where they have that big recycling plant in Pennsylvania, but it's kind of a showcase. It's not in every city of the US by any stretch of the imagination. Mm-hmm. So conscience.
Father, this is Jose. Can you hear me? Or
yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make one quick point, just from my perspective as a doctor in medicine. So, if you look at climate change, somewhat like disease or illness, in medicine, yes, we try to resolve the issues, but we don't try to get rid of illness, and we don't try to get rid of disease because they're ubiquitous in our nature within Earth, in our life on this planet.
Yeah.
So if you look at climate change from that perspective, I think it becomes a little bit less frustrating and less daunting. And if you approach it more as individual problems and then work towards solution of individual problems, as opposed to trying to resolve climate change.
Right.
And I think that's where we hit these big barriers, both of policy and approach, and then of acceptance. Because yes, we're not going to stop the world from becoming warm. These are cycles that you've shown us in the past. That we're in an interglacial cycle, and then it'll become tropicalized, and then eventually will become an ice age again. And we're not going to stop that. That's the nature of things.
Right.
But we can deal with the problems by having more, I think, focused action plans on individual things. So I would do it almost like medicine. Like a climate specialist on freshwater, climate specialist on saltwater, climate specialist on temperate climates, and so on.
Exactly.
And then you would just deal with problems as you would with the millions of diseases that we deal with.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. I like that contribution. Any comments on that, please? I don't want to be the only one talking here, but
I think just well, go ahead, Father Brazil. I apologize.
Okay. Well, my comment's not directly on that. Is actually more echoing Christina's ideas about education. That we just have to continue the mission of getting people to care about it. And just in my lifetime, I can see a huge progression of, when I was a child in the 90s and when 1995 with the first COP in Rio, more people care about this than they did 30 years ago. And we're not making a ton of progress, but we are in fact bringing more people to the conviction that something has to be done about it. So that's good. That's progress. And my awakening really to it came, Father Chofi, you mentioned the Pope has a loud voice, or the Vatican has a loud voice, when he promulgated Laudato Si, and I read that because it's something the Pope wrote, and I was like, oh, this is how all of this stuff affects the world and the poor, and it just opened my eyes to it. So I think that more and more, if we just keep the conversation going, we just keep pointing out, hey, look at how bad these things are. Look at and it's getting worse and worse and worse. Eventually, people do begin to care because it starts to affect them, or they might see that it affects the poorest of the poor. Hopefully, it is very daunting, but I do think that progress is being made, and the most important thing is to just get people to care about it.
Right. Yeah, that raising awareness, absolutely. think, Father Dan?
Then they'd be more amenable to policy changes too, right? Like it's hard to impose that on people that don't care. But when you have a population that does care, then it's just easier. Okay, Father Dan.
Absolutely. Apathy is the enemy.
Just going along with a few of the threads here, like with the idea of having specialists in climate change, with the idea of making people care. I think one thing that would be helpful would be if experts were able to say, like, it's good that we talk about these changes on the large scale, but like, what can I do personally? Like, I'm not saying for me, I'm saying like, if we could hand people a list of like, here's 10 things you can do that would impact climate change in your life, like something as simple as, recycling, or I don't have the examples because I don't know off the top of my head, but maybe one of the examples would be like not using plastic water bottles, which has kind of like been on my conscience a little bit because I use them every day.
I started to do that. Yes. I don't buy just once in a while.
Right.
Before I had a box every day.
Exactly.
50 bottles of this. I said after I saw the video, I said, no.
I see so many of those bags in the supermarket, a huge thing, dozens and dozens of the single-use plastic.
The comments.
Exactly. And in fact, that list, Father Dan, yes. So that list of 5 to 10 things that we can do could be a nice internship project, by the way. If you're looking for ideas. And we just need to get a little creative. For example, turn off the light when you're not using it. Try to use less electricity, try to drive less, or plan the trip so that you do a circuit instead of back and forth, driving. So many things. Don't throw away food. Only serve yourself what you're going to eat. So many things. I mean, off the top of our head, we can come up with a nice dozen things that we can do on a daily basis to be better stewards. So that keywords, right, which are reflect concepts, and Pope Francis promotes this in Laudato Si, stewards of creation. He calls it care for our common home. It's the only home we have so far. So, yes, I wanted to go back a little bit on the concept because what Dr. Jose is saying about looking at the climate change, the global warming, it's so big and complicated and so many factors feed into it that we're not really going to get rid of it. So treat it parallel to a disease model. When you were saying that, Dr. Jose, I was thinking, yes, in fact, my infection is the joy of the bacteria who are living there. It's the glory and the joy of the bacteria who are feeding on my infection, right?
That makes me laugh.
But it's true. So to treat it like that, and then keywords do come into mind, and they're all over these documents and talks and conferences. So remediation, restoration, resilience, right? Where we try to deal with the issue and implementation, so that we deal with the issue to be able to adapt and survive, right, and even thrive amidst the crisis that may be around us. The important thing is, as we do so, kind of simplistically, there are two options. We can do it selflessly, so we take care of my group and my family and my country, or all together, we consider those who are less advantaged and include them because they don't have certainly the resources that we have. Right? Many people, that's why Pope Francis made such a big point in including the poor and the disadvantaged throughout the whole document, because they are the ones who are most impacted. So that consciously, social. I keep bringing up Europe also because it's a model that I'm more used to. I studied there, lived there for a while, but that social conscience in Europe is, frankly, in my opinion, greater than the social conscience here in the US. Of course, they're more clustered on top of each other. The population density generally is about 10 times more than here, right? I think just a number off the bat that I can remember, I think the US population density is about 60 persons per square kilometer. And in Europe, it's going to be about 600 persons per square kilometer. But EVs, electrical vehicles, are big in Europe, and small cars and so forth. I see so many trucks driving around, most of the time single driver, and they accelerate. Even here, they made a drag race out of the little entrance from the new corridor, the new dorms to the front gate. Because, you know, I'm working in the forest and pulling weeds and whatnot, and I hear them blasting away, and then half the way, and the other half the way they're braking, right? So that is diametrically opposed to a conscience, to a mature, responsible conscience at an educational institution of higher learning. So these are the contradictions in our lives and in our folks that we need to present the respectful, insistent argument. It doesn't pay off, right? You don't need that big truck for your regular going to the supermarket, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Can I make another comment?
Yes, please. Why not?
Okay, so one of the other parts of the conference that you sent us that it caught my attention, and I went to it, was gender, and it has to do with what you're commenting. And the main reason I went there is because I wanted to see, you know, I said topics. What is this about gender? I was interested. I thought if they were going to be talking about gender from the point of view of changing sex or whatever, but no,
that's transgender.
No, I understand, but I no, I get it. But I said, let me take a look.
Yeah.
And one of the things that it was really interesting is and fascinating and challenging. And I'm talking for myself. I never thought science could be something that I would be interested on because it was very difficult for me. Like chemistry, I wasn't good in chemistry. However, one of the things that they comment here, and I think is very serious, and it has to do with all this about formation, education, the environment, is how women are not taken into account in the same way that men are. And let's talk seriously. When I tell people that it's 4 priests, 2 doctors, and me, and I start laughing, and I said, it's just me. They don't have any, you know, the theology that you guys have and the science. And I'm fascinated by this, mainly because social justice is my passion in teaching. I thought it was very interesting because maybe here in the United States, we might not see it as well, but I think it's true that women are not inspired or moved to go into science or sitting in boards, because that's what they're talking about, listening more to women, and women have a lot to do with this formation, education, transformation at home in the
first
local
teachers,
level.
right? The first teacher is the mom.
Right. And I thought, you know, that's very interesting. Maybe we can also really do some kind of, in the 10 things that Father Daniel, I don't remember Father Daniel said, I'm thinking maybe we can also say that women need to be more involved in this kind of decision-making processes in general. That was just a comment.
Basically, yeah, always. So really, in the UN and many other places, they talk about gender equality, right? It was one of the 15 goals for 27, remember? Gender equality. And we see when we expand it throughout the world, women have sometimes an overwhelming burden in contrast to men in general, especially with the raising of children under very difficult, dire conditions, right? And it's very natural for moms not to abandon their children, but the dad many times can walk away, at least temporarily. Whether they come back or not is a different story. So that's it. At the global level, there's a big concern for trying to level the playing field there, but nature is what it is, right? That women are the ones who are bearing the children. But the participation in that, and that has all kinds of consequences too, because many women, many adult women in the world don't have time to get an education because they're raising the children. And so typically it's the men that are getting the education, including their daughters and sons. So their sons are getting more education than the daughters, and the system is perpetuated. little side comment on you being the only woman in the, what I call the old cohort, not by, simply because you started first before this new cohort, right? But you're the one woman amongst about 7. But the new cohort is 3 women and 1 man. So poor Kenny, you know, he has to deal with 3 women in this cohort. One of those women is her sister, his sister. But anyway, so cohorts vary from one to the other. But I'm always encouraged when I see women in particular signing up for this Bio-6, because in general, this is a very risky general statement. But yeah, the science will be more challenging generally there. Remember another anecdote from a colleague of mine who used to teach her, a very high esteemed professor. He said that in the United States, you know, for the purpose of science and application into grants like NSF and NIH, et cetera, at the federal level, and even many times at the state level, women in the United States for science are considered a minority, even though technically you're actually the majority because you're a little more than 50%. I think it's 50.5% women and 49.5% men, just by the numbers in the population, in the US population. However, for purpose of science, women are considered a minority, which has legal implications, has fiscal implications, right? Like other minorities, they have access to certain funds that the majority doesn't have. But then what happens is these women scientists are in such demand for giving talks and going here and there and participating in boards, like you say, and committees, that these women scientists are getting overwhelmed in contrast to the men scientists because they're fewer. Mm-hmm. And they are in more demand. And we've seen burnout on women scientists who already accomplished their field because of the bigger demand. So it kind of conflates, you know, it compounds on itself. So again, issues that we need to deal with. Certainly the contribution of women to care for our common home is crucial, because I would say, these are generalities, of course, but women tend to be more in tune with nature than men. It's my perception over the years and my experience. There's a natural connectivity there to nature that I think, it's just my opinion, tends to occur more in women than in men. All right. So the contribution of women in general to care for our common home, for environmental, saving the environment and protecting it and so forth, is a very important contribution. It's crucial, essential. Mm-hmm. But we also see, when we look at these photos of people, we see a lot of women participating, and that's very encouraging, right? A lot.
Father, a comment on the generational component of this.
Yes.
Two things. One about sciences and so on. I think when I was in medical school, about 10% of my class was female. Mm-hmm. In general now, 50 to 60% of medical school classes are female. And so right. they're just in I would say one generation.
Just one generation.
That has all flipped around. Mm-hmm. And then just to comment, because I'm kind of with my family here, it wasn't until my children came back from school that we started recycling. And they were the ones that kind of brought that habit into the house.
They got in your face.
Yeah, so I think the younger generation has a good future ahead of it if we don't get in their way.
Yes, very true. They're more conscious about that. Mm-hmm. But one way or another, the economy is also a big factor, because this consumer society, right? If we don't consume and waste, then the economy kind of gets stuck. Mm-hmm. So I think with regards to economic models that are sustainable, still, I believe it has to be in a market economy. To me, it's still the best system. But where there's not so much packaging, it frustrates me that I have to I typically have to go through 2 or 3 layers of packaging to get to the actual product, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Anyway, okay, so let's try to wrap it up. Maybe before noon, if there are any other parting comments along the way. Well, if I could just leave you with that one thought of conscience, right? Developing conscience. One time I remember seeing a definition of conscience, and I'm going to write it, or actually maturity. No, it wasn't conscience, it was maturity. I'm just going to try to open up a document to write, because I saw this definition of maturity decades ago. Oh, this is our syllabus. Yeah, give me one of these. Come on. Bill Gates, just give me a Word document. Oh, can I get it? Nothing. I'm stuck. Skip.
But
maybe. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. I just want to do this. This is my own little. No, not active. Oh, activate. Oh no, back. Be patient with the skinny old man, okay? I'm getting there. Remember how to do this here. Maybe that one? Maybe. Oh, goodness gracious. Let's hope it's the same one as the university. No.
Try to see if you have notes on the computer.
Go away from here. Where?
So there in the corner, the bottom left.
Bottom left here? Yeah.
Notes.
Notes.
Or notepad.
Notes. No. OneNote maybe? Or Publisher? Let's try that one. No. Sign in.
Father, why don't you go to your documents in the file that is the yellow file by the Chrome? You sit down in your screen.
Right.
Open that and pick one document that you have there in Word.
Yeah, you know, that's what I tried, but it didn't let me. I just picked maybe a different, let me try a different document.
Go to desktop. You don't have anything.
This is not my.
Or probably search for notepad.
Look, I tell you what, we're going to do it another way. There. We're going to, no, wait, I did this before. Come on. Insert, no, doesn't let me. Wow. Not active. Note. Right, okay. Here, not here. Notepad. Single word? Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Right. And maturity. This reminds me way back when I was using programming. Fortran, Basic, COBOL. It's programming language. Now I just want to make it bigger. How can I make it bigger? Format, font. Yeah. Let's just try font, and use a big font like 36. Okay, let's see what happens. Yeah. Okay. So that can be seen, right? And now make it a little smaller so it actually fits in there. Okay. By hook or crook. Okay, so this is a definition that I saw a long time ago. It kind of stuck with me. All right. So maturity is a gradual process of going from self-centered and other. It's not going to stay in a single page. Hello. Oh, I have to return. Okay. And other motivated to other-centered and self-motivated. Okay, so that's my little contribution. I saw this a long time ago. It made a lot of sense. When we look at children, it's all me, right? Me, myself. And they're not self-motivated necessarily. They're motivated by punishment or reward. You do your homework and I'll give you a cookie. You misbehave and I take away the Nintendo. Do they still use Nintendo? That was Nintendo's probably in the museums today. Some kind of game, right? So self-centered and auto-motivated is typically the immature mind, the one that hasn't matured yet, synaptic pruning. And eventually at some point we grow and it would be nice to become self-motivated. Why am I studying? Why am I paying graduate school, for the knowledge? Self-motivated and other-centered. It's about the other. It's not about me. It's about the other, right? But if everyone, you notice, if everyone does this about the other, then I am the other of someone else. I'm also the other. So if everybody does it, it works. Okay. Therefore, that's my contribution. So basically, try to always form our conscience the best way possible according to the knowledge that is available at the time, and then process it with critical thinking and put it to some kind of good use. That was my motivation for starting this master 6 years ago. I didn't see anything like it in the Archdiocese, and Laudato Si had just been published, so I went forward, try to combine the human life issues also with the environmental issues and have a comprehensive package. All right. Anything else? What are you going to do as soon as you leave this class, if you haven't done it yet? Evaluate the course, right? The 2 courses.
Evaluation.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Once again, thank you. A blessed Thanksgiving to you and your families and your friends. Stay safe, please. It's the most travel weekend and holiday in the US. And then afterwards, we get the death count of all those who died in accidents. So please be safe this coming holiday. We'll meet up again in January, around mid-January. We'll start up, all right? Different courses for different folks. You'll still have, you'll have a course in common between the old cohort and the new cohort is the internship, but you're not really seeing each other then. It's on an individual basis, but you'll have that course in common, and then you'll have different courses for the finishing cohort. It will be healthcare bioethics, and for the starting cohort, it would be the fundamental principles in bioethics. All right. Thanks again.
And Father Daniel and Father Stephen will come to Miami. That's what they said.
All right, let's do that. Yes, before we go underwater, come on over.
It'd be awesome. We'd love to come, and maybe we could all go out for dinner or something like that before we graduate.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Oh, super. Absolutely. We'd love to have you, and I could probably try to host you both. All right, so you don't spend a lot of money here. Okay. Thanks again. Many blessings to all of you.
Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. God bless you.
Likewise.
See you on Tuesday.
All right.
Yeah, see you Tuesday.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you'll see each other on the probability thing. And
Tuesday,
if anyone wants the forest, let me know.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks again. Bye.
See, I'll be there this week though for the forest.
Okay.
I got the hour that you said.
Absolutely. Just let me know. Okay, Antonio. Thanks again. All the best. Where did I do this? End? Yes.